I want to honor any other or any Indigenous elders that are here with us and send you blessings and peace. And I just want to also just take a moment. I'd like if we could just take one moment in silence for California and all of its beings that is still on fire, and all the places in the world where there are fires burning out of control, and for all of the people that we have lost during the pandemic and people that are suffering. There's a lot of people suffering right now. So if we can just take a moment of silence to just go into our heart and send peace and love and light. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Mason. He's been my spiritual mentor and teacher for many years and a great friend, great member of my family. And I am going to, do you want me to share the screen with the PowerPoint first or just let you say a few words and then you tell me when to share it?
I think we could just start. I'd like to just say thank you to everyone for joining us today. It's a really interesting opportunity to talk about a tradition that I truly, truly love and think about what it teaches us about ecotherapy and developing a different sense of relationship to ourselves and the natural and spiritual worlds that we inhabit. So with that, I think we can jump into the slide. Okay. I want to talk today about ecotherapy and ecospirituality, and specifically, I want to explore what Oricha religion, which has its roots in the forests of West Africa, brings to bear in terms of understanding our relationship to nature and how we can heal ourselves, our communities, and the natural world. A little bit about me. I was raised on the Severn River on Piscataway lands in what the United States refers to as the state of Maryland. I was initiated into Oricha in 1992 as a priest of Ochun in Cuba, and that was at the end of my PhD studies in folklore, where I worked almost exclusively on this religious tradition. I spent many years studying analytical psychology, and so the way I think about Oricha religion is deeply fused with Jungian psychology and Jungian psychological perspectives. And I began working in ecotherapy in about 2009, which was sort of as I was contemplating whether or not to become an analyst or not. I spend my days at a large museum complex in DC, whose name I'm not allowed to use, but it's been a terrific way for me to have a very solid foot in a world of creativity and exploration, and at the same time have space for this important work that I'm doing on the religious side. We begin every ceremony in Oricha religion with an invocation. It's usually referred to in the Cuban tradition as an invocation, as you can see there. And when you get to the slide, thanks. I'll render an English version of this invocation. And really, part of what is beautiful about it from my point of view is it is a litany that recounts all of the connections that we have at any particular moment. And these are very fluid, but it is an invocation that happens over and over again. I'll do a little bit of it in Lukumi, which is the Yoruba dialect that's spoken in Cuban Orisha religion. And then I'll switch over to English. Ache olofi, ache olorun, ache odudua, ache bobo egun, ache bobo orisha, ache elegua, ache oshun, ache bobo iworo, ache olaoton, ache bobo agbalagba. With the blessings of Olofi, with the blessings of Olorun, with the blessings of the creator God, Olodumare, with the blessings of all of the ancestors who sit at the feet of the creator, with the blessings of my ritual house, Ile Fuche, with the blessings of my godmother, Norma Pedroso, Caldo, Omisaide, with the blessings of my teacher, Ernesto Pichardo Bairao, with the blessings of my teacher, Pedro Abreu, Asonjanji, with the blessings of my mother, Ardith Cade, with the blessings of all of my elders, with the blessings of the Orishas, with the blessings of Elegua, with the blessings of Ochun, the goddess of the river, with the blessings of Yamaya, the goddess of the sea, with the blessings of Olokun, the Orisha who is mysterious and lives at the bottom of the ocean, with the blessings of Babaluaye, with the blessings of Asohano, the earth deity. We come together today to share knowledge and to work towards healing ourselves, our communities, and our planet. So as I said, this invocation is very common. We really begin every ceremony with it, and it's spread throughout major ceremonies. It gets different versions of it get said over and over again. As I said, the language is a Yoruba-based dialect called Lukumi. The religion started in West Africa, and it was carried to the New World by enslaved people. And it is only through their tenacity and their real commitment to their perseverance is really the right word, to maintain this tradition that it was passed down to the elders who've taught me. I've been incredibly blessed with unbelievably generous teachers from all different walks of life in Cuba and in the United States mostly. The religion exists in various forms in Nigeria, Benin, Togo, and then it came to the Americas. It's very broadly practiced in Brazil, Venezuela, Mexico, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the United States and Canada. It's other places as well, but those are the places where it is strongest. And I just want to acknowledge that without the incredible perseverance of my ritual ancestors, none of what I'm saying to you today would be possible. I want to stress again that nothing I'm saying today would be possible for me to share with you without those ancestors and without the very generous teachers who have taught me everything I know. Orisha is a Latinx tradition, and an Afro-Latinx tradition that, as I said, enslaved people brought it with them from Africa, and it really mixed it in a rich way with the resources that they found in the New World, the natural resources, the animals, the plants, and also the new social environment that they found themselves in. And today, what I want to do in the first part of the conversation is really explore the sacred forest as a source for the divine. This is an idea that permeates all of the religious practices of Orisha, whether it's in West Africa, Brazil, or Cuba, the United States. I want to locate humans in that ecosystem, and then I want to talk about the deity of the earth, and who is also the deity of infectious diseases and of healing. So those are the three big sections of my talk today. So normally when I give talks like this, I put up a slide like this one that says, okay, here's how the religion works. Here's the cosmology. There's a creator God that we call Olorun. There are deities who were left in charge of natural phenomena. I mentioned some of them in my invocation. Elegua is the god of the savannah. Ochun is the goddess of the river. Yemaya is the goddess of the ocean. And the tradition provides an enormous amount of information about how to engage and activate and honor those deities. And just to be clear, there are about 36 of them that are really widely honored in Cuba. There are more, but those are the ones that are most broadly honored. And then everybody has ancestors. Those are your blood ancestors. Those are your lineage ancestors if you're a priest or a priestess. And those are also spirits that accompany you in this life, companion spirits, if you will. Today, I don't want to talk about it in this highly structured way. Today, I want to walk with you through the sacred forest and explore how a person in the tradition might experience the forest. So it's important to start by saying that this idea of wilderness or the monte or the forest is governed by a deity called Ochun. Ochun is the deity of herbs, and herbs can be used for healing, and they can be obviously they can be used for more difficult things. I mean, the nature of herbs is that they have neutral power, and humans, when we use them as we see fit according to our character. So this is incredibly important. Every deity has specific herbs that are associated with him or her, and every herb is deeply understood both for symbolic and ritual purposes, but also for its herbological healing properties. In a forest context, an Oricha person is going to see herbs and immediately associate them with their uses. And as I said, those can be ritual uses or more traditional kind of medicinal herbological uses. This is Kaunutillo, which is an herb that is sacred to Yemaya, the Oricha or deity of the ocean. And it has little blue flowers, which is perhaps why there's a connection with Yemaya. It's used in a whole number of ways, but it's a very standard ingredient in the ritual preparations that priests and priests make in this tradition to purify and strengthen objects, people, places. And in fact, we talk about singing Ochun. There is a ceremony that we engage in called singing Ochun, where an enormous number of herbs, usually 21, are brought from the forest after making offerings to Ochun in the forest. The herbs are gathered, they're brought to the house. They are ritually prepared, and they're ground by hand, mixed with water and some other ingredients. And that becomes, that liquid is then referred to as Ochun, the same name as the god. And that is used, as I said, to purify and strengthen people's bodies, purify and strengthen ritual objects that we use in ceremony. And it is through this bringing the herbal power into the house and transforming it that almost all of our ritual work begins. As we continue through this journey through the forest, we encounter Ochun, the river. I should say this is a photograph of my local creek, Rock Creek, which runs through the heart of Washington, D.C. And really one of the brilliant moves that the ancestors made was they took a specific river that they considered sacred to Ochun in West Africa, and they mapped it onto every river. So in Nigeria, there is an Ochun River, and it is sacred to Ochun. And in fact, in the New World, almost every river is Ochun. And so it means that there's an ability to connect more broadly with this, this divine force and this face of God, if you will, as some authors have referred to the deities. I also, it's super important, and this is a very it's a very important idea that doesn't necessarily translate well from Orisha religion into Western conversational contexts and Western thinking. Ochun is the owner of the river. That's something that people say all the time. But in fact, Ochun is also the river itself. And so there's a kind of fluidity, pun intended, between the deity and the natural phenomena that embodies that deity. So this flowing together of the natural world and the divine is a constant in the tradition. Ochun, the river, is running water and fresh, and like most religious traditions, there is a strong association between running water and purification. And so there are frequently ceremonies done at the river to purify people spiritually and physically, to heal them in some way, to connect them again with the waters of life, connect them with that which moves within them. And in fact, our initiation ceremonies all begin with a trip to the river where our old lives are cast away. This is an image from the Rio Almendares in Havana, and on any day in Havana when it's not pouring down rain, you can find people doing these kinds of ceremonies. Yellow is Ochun's color, and you see here that there's a yellow basin. One of the priests is wearing a yellow shirt. Orange is also orange, and peach are other colors that are associated with her. You see the sunflowers on the ground. All of these things are meant to honor Ochun and to call her forth. And I should also say this is a key concept in the religion, and why naming in the invocation is so important. This basic idea that when you call something by its name, or whether it's a person or a deity or a spirit, it's going to respond in the same way that if parent says its child's name, that child will respond. So Ochun is the goddess of sweet water, and she is associated with love and physical attraction, romantic love, the kind of attraction that leads to intimate relationships and sexuality, and thus to procreation. And one of the other things about the tradition that's really fascinating is that people carry these energies with them. So Phoenix is a priestess of Aganyu, so she carries the energy of the volcano in some way. She is a vessel for that energy. I am a priest of Ochun, but nothing like Beyonce. No one knows if Beyonce is initiated, but everybody recognizes that she is borrowing generously from the symbols of Orisha tradition in this video that she made. So we're talking about phenomena that exist in completely natural forms, like the river, in ceremonial forms, like the ceremony of the river that I showed you, or in individual people who carry that energy, who are vessels of the deities. As we continue walking through the forest, at some point, if we were in Cuba, we would probably encounter a ceiba tree. The ceiba, which is also called iroko, is sometimes called the tree of life or the tree of spirits. Iroko is the spirit, the Orisha, the deity that lives in this tree. And 80 years ago, Iroko was referred to as the president of the Orishas, the president of the deities. And the idea was that at midday, when the sun was very hot, all of the deities would gather in the shade of the ceiba tree. Iroko would climb down and adjudicate differences. And so that was the role of the president of the Orishas. That's not a widely held notion anymore, but it's a beautiful story, I think, and gives you some sense of the centrality of the ceiba in the thinking of the tradition. a few other things about the Seba which are really important. Even today, most people in Cuba will not cut down a Seba tree out of respect and maybe a little superstition, but mostly respect. It is thought too to be a place where the ancestral spirits gather. And so if a person is, a person has an ancestor who they want to honor, but they can't make it to the cemetery where that ancestor is buried. Say the person is in Havana, but their grandmother is buried in Santiago de Cuba, that they will go to the Seba and speak to their grandmother at the Seba. So in a certain way, the Seba functions as a kind of universal cemetery. Any ancestral presence can be connected to at the Seba more directly than in a lot of other places. And I just think that that's terrifically beautiful. I'm not sure why that's always captivated me, but the idea that you can go and commune with your ancestors. I suppose if you think about an enslaved person in 1800, trying to find some connection back to the ancestors that they left in Nigeria or Benin, this would be an incredibly powerful opportunity to reconnect. And that reconnecting with the ancestors is done through direct connection with the Seba tree. So the connection to the ancestors is connection to nature. All over Cuba, at the base of Seba trees, you will see folks leaving offerings, or in certain moments you can see people actually leaning down and putting their head to the Seba and praying. This is actually an interesting photograph from downtown Havana, where a Seba tree grows right outside of the little church where legend says that the Spaniards celebrated the first Catholic Mass. And many people in Cuba make a big deal about the fact that the Seba is right there, and the Seba was a witness to that first Mass. And so the kind of the preeminence of the African traditions in Cuba is alluded to and talked about in that way. So a few takeaways from our little trip through the sacred forest. Divinity manifests in this incredible diversity that is the forest. Natural forces can be channeled through ritual, and an enormous amount of the tradition is about going into the forest, gathering natural forces and bringing them home for ritual use. And it's really important to understand that these natural forces, the deities, animate both the natural world, but also human life. And so that work is incredibly informative to everything that we do in the tradition. So now I want to switch gears and talk about where humans sit in the ecosystem. So instead of traveling through the landscape and using the natural world as our stepping off point, I want to use an individual human as a stepping off point. Every person is connected to specific ecosystems in our tradition. So as I said, Phoenix is a child of the volcano. I am a child of the river. These are the most immediate and obvious kinds of connections to ecosystems, but it goes significantly it goes significantly deeper than that. And I'd like to explore that some. First of all, every person is considered to have a head Orisha and a second parent. So if your head Orisha, your main deity, is female, like mine is, then your second parent will be male. If your head Orisha is male, then your second parent will be female, and these become your parents in the religion, your Orisha parents. And there is a really deep sense of loyalty to those two Orishas. This is my Ochun and my Elegua. Again, the ancestors, all of us have individual specific lineages, blood lineages and ritual lineages, and that connects us to a whole group of people. In some cases, and in the case of my godmother's family, for example, she was initiated, my godmother Norma Pedroso Omisaide was initiated by her grandmother, Benigna Pedroso. And so in her case, the blood lineage and the ritual lineage merged, but that's not always the case. So people pay an enormous amount of attention to who's related to whom and how. And, it's very common for people to be able to name 20 or 30 ancestors in both their blood lineage and their ritual lineage. So our tradition involves a number of divination processes. Divination is really a process that we use to gather information from the gods or the ancestors. We're asking them to orient us to specific situations, and that can be a situation as general as our whole life, which is what happens when we're initiated, or as specific as should I take this job or not? Just to use a random example, but without going into the depths of the complexity of those divination systems, which is incredibly interesting. There are divination signs, and there are 256 divination signs, so it's an incredibly rich and diverse system. Remember, diversity is a manifestation of divinity in our tradition. So some of these divination signs actually speak of particular animals. For example, Ogbeyono, or Ejene Ogunda, as it is also called, is the nickname for the divination sign is the crocodile. And the person has the kind of character generally, has a character that imitates the crocodile. It lies in wait. It appears to be very inactive, very passive, but it's watching everything. And then suddenly it acts, the person in that sign acts with great speed and great force to accomplish what it wants and needs. There's another divination sign, Ejeonledi, just to give another example, which is all about being surrounded by dangerous forces. And that's a kind of powerful way that people often talk about that. I know a diviner who takes his students to the ecological location of their divination sign and uses the space as a way to teach them about their divination sign from their initiation, and to help them understand the dynamics of how it works in the natural world so that they can understand it more effectively in the social world. So I am a child of the two waters, of the river and the ocean, although I was initiated to Ochun, and she is my mother. In the initiation process, Yemaya, the Oricha of the ocean, made clear that I needed to love and respect her as if she were also my mother. This is another picture of the Almendares River in Havana, and I chose it because just under the W in waters is the building where I was initiated as a priest. And as we were preparing, every day I would come down to this green space at the bottom and sit by the ocean and the river and pray. And so for me, it was no surprise when it came out that I was a child of the two waters. And when I told them that I was born, I had grown up next to a brackish river. The Severn River is brackish because it's a tributary to the Chesapeake Bay. Everybody sort of looked at each other and said, of course, this makes perfect sense. So this is a really common notion that there are people who are the children of the two waters. And so this is for people who are the child of the two waters. This is the very best place to make offerings, because you can actually make offerings to Yemaya and Ochun at the same time. Feed your two mothers together, whether you're leaving a little bit of fruit, or you're singing songs, or doing something more forceful. This is a key place. And so ritually, we are connected to the landscape. This is the crazy slide, okay? I want to acknowledge that. This is the crazy slide. It's very complicated. When you take diversity as a manifestation of divinity, you end up having enormous numbers of relationships. And so I have actually just charted some of my own personal cosmology to give you an example. And I do myself not to be narcissistic, but because it would be really disrespectful to do this with somebody else's personal pantheon. So in the middle, you have the Eleda. Eleda means that which belongs to the creator. And we use that word to refer to our individual spirits, the same notion of spirit. You as an individual, that is your Eleda, the irreducible spiritual piece that lives in everyone is the Eleda. So as I said, if you look on the left-hand side, I was initiated to Ochun. The initiation showed that I was also, the Yemaya was my second mother. So there's this very fluid relationship, again, pun totally intended, between Yemaya and Ochun. When Ochun gave me her blessings at the end of my initiation, she said, not only are you a child of the two waters, but Olokun, the owner of the bottom of the ocean, is the source of all of your blessings. And so Olokun shows up as a very important piece of that part of my personal pantheon. Right-hand side, you have Elegua. I could have probably put in another connection to his brother Ogun, the warrior and hunter and herbalist and blacksmith, who works closely with him and plays an important role in my life as well. Over time, it's become very clear that I have a deep connection to Babalu Aye, who is the god of the earth, the god of infectious disease and healing, who we're going to talk about later. He has many different manifestations, and so over time I've had to engage those. So I was initiated first into Babalu Aye Lukumi, which is a tradition that comes more from the Yoruba-inspired traditions in Cuba. I had to get initiated into the Arara tradition, which traces its roots back to Fong-speaking people in what's now Benin. And both Babalu Aye from the Yoruba-inspired tradition and Asohano from the Arara and the Fong-inspired traditions honor Nanu, the mother of this deity. Nanu is the mother of both Asohano and Babalu Aye. And so she came out and claimed a particularly powerful role as resolving really significant problems in my life. So that's just a kind of snapshot of my personal pantheon with the Orishas. If you go below, the gray, kind of gray-blue, are all spirits, ancestral spirits. These are all my companion spirits. So my main spirit is named Clara Luz, and she then mediates with all the other spirits. I have a native spirit who's strongly associated with bears. I'm working from left to right here. Hunso and Hundesi are both spirits that come from the Fon tradition, and they in turn link me to other Arara spirits. Omidara is a spirit who was a priestess of Yemaya in her life. And the only thing that she does in my life is works with my godchildren who are Yemaya people. So she never shows up except when I have a godchild who is a child of Yemaya who needs help. It's the only time she ever shows up. She shows up usually in dreams, gives me information, warns me, gives me solutions to challenges, and then she disappears again for years at a time. I also have a Congo spirit, Tata Bilongo, and he connects to a bunch of other Congo spirits. These are spirits who who are engaged in Congo and Angolan-inspired religious practices. The specifics of this are not important. What the takeaway here is that we are deeply, deeply rooted in an incredibly diverse set of spiritual relationships. And much of our work as priests revolves around acknowledging and attending to those relationships. Now I want to talk about another deity, Da. Da is got many names. Dan is one. Dangbe is a name that's used in Benin for the deity. In Cuba, Da is sometimes called Aida Huero, sometimes called Danda Huero, sometimes called Huero. Just for the ease of this conversation, I'm going to just call this deity Da because it's less exotic and easier to say. Da is, in fact, all about fortune, good fortune, and well-being. So fortune in this tradition, in the Cuban manifestation of this tradition, there is this very deep set of standard prayers that people ask for every time they pray. Health is the first one of those. But there's this idea of alafia. That's a Yoruba word that comes straight across to the dialect that's spoken in Cuba. Alafia means both peace, as in tranquility, and it means physical health. So people routinely ask for health, strength, solidity or inner resolve, which is in Spanish is called firmeza, and spiritual and material development. So the idea that you're constantly growing and changing. This is only possible if you are deeply rooted. Now, this is a tree from Rock Creek Park here in Washington, and the tree's da are its roots. Anything that is curved and provides nourishment is considered to be a manifestation of da. And we're going to talk about a number of them. I just want to stop here and say, in the African American roots and hoodoo tradition, there's a lot of emphasis placed on what's commonly referred to as St. John the Conqueror's root. And in many, many communities, any root that is above ground, any root that is visible, is thought to be St. John the Conqueror's root. And that may be connected historically to this idea of Da as being this incredibly important and forceful presence for good in the life of people. Another really fundamental image of Da is the umbilical cord that connects a child to its mother. Again, curved and nurturing. This, as in many traditions, many cultures, there's a great deal of emphasis placed in some communities in Oricha tradition on the umbilical cord. It's often buried at the base of a tree, and that tree takes on special ritual significance for the child. But this is part of it's another manifestation of the deity. And as I said, one could say that it is the deity because the natural manifestation of the deity and the deity really become the same thing. Snakes are one of the most common expressions of Da, and some of you will have heard of Dambala Wedo from the Haitian Vodou tradition, and that is the Haitian manifestation of this deity. This image is from an important temple or shrine in Ouida, Benin, that's dedicated to Dambe. And I used it not because it's exotic and exciting, but because in Cuba, when a Da priest is made, they still put an unglazed terracotta vessel next to Da's, on Da's altar, so that the snake can come and sit sit on the altar with the deity. You'll see here too that there are two heads, one at the bottom that's pretty obvious, but one at say 1 o'clock that's much less obvious. Da is thought of as being twins who merged and became a single deity, and so that Da is often represented with twins or with two snakes. The other thing that's really important about Da in the Cuban tradition is that Da made it possible for humans to exist. Da made the earth. The creator asked everyone, all the Orishas, all the deities to come together and ask them to gather the waters so that the water, the earth would become visible, and future creation could happen. And Da went to the diviner, made an offering, and because he was a snake, he proceeded to just spin and spin and spin and made a very deep hole. And at the end of a week, when the creator asked everyone to come back together, other deities had made rivers or lagoons or lakes, but Da had made the ocean. And the ocean allowed the vast majority of the water to fall back and the earth to rise up. There's another story in which Da, when the two parts of Da, Adawedo and Dandawero, come together, plants and animals and all kinds of life bursts forth. So you're really talking about a different manifestation of, or a more accessible manifestation of the creator. And in fact, in one story, in that story where Da creates life, people actually explicitly compare Da to Olodumare, to the creator god. So this is just a throne, an image from an altar for Wero in the Ararasabalu tradition in Cuba, which is the lineage that I'm from. And I just want to stress that the takeaway here is that well-being, alafia, results from sustaining these diverse relationships, from being able to be flexible like a snake or an umbilical cord or a root, and from being connected to a wide variety of people and substances and spirits that surround you. It's a very powerful notion of what makes well-being. And of course, lots of contemporary psychological studies affirm this, that social connection is one of the most powerful things for human well-being. Da, is often referred to as the grandfather of Babaluaye, the deity of the earth. He also rules infectious disease and healing. And I want to talk about him for a lot of different reasons, primarily because we're talking about ecotherapy and he is the deity of healing, but also obviously infectious disease is a tremendously topical subject, given that we're in the middle of a pandemic. Babaluaye is his longer name in Lukumi. I'm going to just call him Babalu, again, for ease. This is an image of a scarlet ibex, and I've got it here to remind me to tell you the story of the origins of Babaluaye. Nanu and Dasoji, who are both manifestations of Babaluaye, came together at the river Dasa in what is now Benin, and they laid together under a ceiba tree, the ceiba tree that we talked about before, and they conceived a child. And they lived by the Dasa River for 9 months. And when their child was born, he was horribly, horribly sick and transfigured. And after a few days, he died. And if any of you have lived through the loss of a child, you know how incredibly devastating that is. Nanu, the mother, buried the child next to the river, and they again conceived a child. And when that child was born, he was healthy. But in the tree overhead, there was a scarlet ibex, and she, Nanu, the mother, recognized that the scarlet ibex was the spirit of Babalu, the spirit of this deity. And so many people say that you can't, that the scarlet ibex is an incredibly important part of the medicine associated with Babaluaye, which means that people use the feathers and in ritual preparations. So Nanu and Dasoji, these two manifestations of Babalu Aye, continued to have children, and Babalu Aye has, well, I know more than 100 roads for Babalu Aye. They cover every single imaginable disease, and then there's some other interesting things too. So Babalu himself embodies this divine diversity. Babalu Aye is also thought of as the deity of the earth, the lord of the earth. And Babalu Aye breaks down literally. Baba means father, Olu means lord, and Aye means of the world or of the physical earth. He is famous for having lost his temper and been cast out of the community of the deities. He was limp because he had a bad leg, and he was teased and taunted for not dancing at a celebration. And when he finally gave in against his better judgment and started trying to dance, he fell to the ground and everybody laughed at him. And so he gathered himself back up and he spread sesame seeds in his hand, and he used his ritual broom to brush these sesame seeds onto all of the other deities. And in the morning, they all had smallpox. Each of those sesame seeds, where it had touched their skin, had created an actual sore. And because of this, the head of all of the Orishas, Obatala, made Babalu heal all the other Orishas, and then he cast him out into exile. And so he is a mendicant, he's a wanderer. And so it's very common to think of him as wandering alone on a road. This particular road leads to his one of his most important shrines in Cuba, in the town of Rincon, where there's a Catholic church for St. Lazarus, which many practitioners of the African-inspired traditions also associate strongly with Babalu. Babalu is famous for healing people, and one of the longest standing traditions in Cuba is that people make promises to Babalu. If he heals them, they will do X or Y. They will wear sackcloth, which is very humble clothing that he wears, or they will, in this case, push themselves along the road as part of an annual pilgrimage to his church in Rincon that I was talking about before. In this case, this woman, who's a friend of mine, actually promised Babalu Aye that she would do this for 7 years in a row when her daughter was born and was incredibly ill, and was her future was not promising. And so my friend prayed passionately and made this promise that for 7 years she would take her child if she survived, and her child would go with her, and she would drag herself to this shrine. This was incredibly, it's incredibly taxing physically, but it's a very common thing. And it's interesting, under the Cuban Revolution, this is a tradition that's been allowed to persist, and literally hundreds of thousands of people do it every year. This is about making an offering of yourself so that you will be healed. Babalu Aye is also strongly associated with mystery and secrecy. When he was cast out, he ended up living in a cave by himself for a very long time. And while he was there, he is said to have created his ritual broom, which is called the Ha. Sorry, another image of mystery and secrecy. This is actually called the secret of Babalu Aye, and is at the shrine, the family house where my Babalu Aye lineage comes from, in Perico, in Matanzas province in Cuba. The story around this is fabulous. The elder who died in the 60s appeared one day at her godson's house and said, "It's time for me to give you the secret." And she went into the latrine and buried this secret. And now they use it every year as a key part of their annual purification ceremony, which they do each December. No one knows what's in it. No one knows. They know only sort of how to take care of it, if you will, how to tend to it, what it likes, but they don't know really how it works or what's in it. So I mentioned the ha. This is the ha of the ritual broom of a very famous priest, Rafael Linares Emerego, whose wife, Raquel Fernandez, is one of my godparents. This is the handle, and that's Raquel's hand there holding it. The part that she's holding is the bristles that are used to sweep. And this is a symbolic broom that's charged with what we call medicine. Inside these, under these cowrie shells is what we call a charge, or an osain. In fact, there's that word that is also a deity again. The osain will have earths and herbs, and earths from different places, and herbs, and sometimes feathers and sticks from particular trees that are ground into powder. And all of that is meant to intensify the power, the efficacy of the broom as it heals people. This broom is used, as I said, to cleanse people's bodies on a regular basis. Most houses, it's done on a weekly basis, and then there's a major ceremony every December. That major ceremony in December is called the Ochun, and it is all about healing. This is an Awan that Phoenix and I did in California, in San Francisco. The Awan uses lots of natural foods, simple natural foods by and large, dried beans, fruits, vegetables, and people take those things in their hands, brush them, and then cast them into the basket, casting out symbolically and physically and literally for us the sickness that may be holding them back. It's an incredibly powerful ceremony, and there are pieces of it that we can't talk about. It's a mystery religion, and so there are parts of the ceremonies that we don't talk about ever with anybody who isn't involved. But it has moments of really powerful individual healing when you clean yourself, when you're cleaned with the ha. And then there are also moments of really moving unity and community. So it's a very powerful ceremony, and one, as I said, that most communities do every December. It also gets done when a particular person needs it because they're sick. Again, Babaluaye, because he is sometimes thought of as having died and been reborn when he was in that cave, he is associated very strongly with the ancestors. And this is actually the Babaluaye shrine of Octavia Zulueta Hundesi, who planted that secret that I showed you a picture of before. Babaluaye is most strongly associated with a plant called Kunde Amor, and this is the Kunde Amor plant here. It's a vine that grows, and it dies back completely in the dry season. It disappears absolutely. It is completely deciduous, and then it is reborn when the rains come back. And so, sorry, I've got that backwards. It dies oddly in the wet season and comes back in the dry season, which is when Babaluaye is honored. So it grows out of nothing and will cover an entire fence or an entire bush in a very short period of time. And it's used in the Awan, ideally at every Awan, because it is so strongly associated with Babaluaye. And we make a little simple necklace out of it, and everybody wears that necklace when we're doing the ceremony. But this idea of decay and regeneration is another way of talking about the death and rebirth that is part of Babaluaye's very makeup. So that pattern is something that we expect with when Babaluaye is acting in our lives, or we expect to see it in the lives of his children. Dr. Fauci is here, not because he's wearing a Washington Nationals mask, but because the elders say in our tradition that you can negotiate with any of the other deities, but you can't negotiate with Babaluaye. You can't play with your health. You can't ignore the warnings that you're given from this deity. And in some ways, I've kind of ironically here chosen Dr. Fauci because he is the person who is telling us what we need to do at this point. We need to wear our masks. We need to wash our hands. We need to practice social distancing. And it is hard. There's no question that these things go against our most natural human inclinations to be social. And that's interesting, right? Because Babalu Aye rules this space of isolation and seclusion in the cave. And in some ways, that's what we're all having to do. We're having to be more secluded. Maybe we're lucky enough to be in a social group of people that we care about, but that seclusion is part of what's happening now. And I want to be really clear that the tradition says that part of the challenge is that you actually have to follow directions. And a significant part of this work is about being obedient to the revelations about what's going to keep you healthy. So that's something that we experience in lots of different ways. And I think we're all experiencing at this moment with the pandemic. Decay and regeneration is part of the process. And these are herbs that were actually picked, and they're in a big galvanized steel basin sitting in my basement, actually, waiting for a ceremony to begin. These herbs, which were picked and brought into the house, were later transformed into the osign for Babalu Aye. And that osign was used to refresh him and his altar, but also used to cleanse everybody in my religious house or my religious community. So the herbs become a source of powerful regeneration. One of Babalu Aye's many praise names is Olode, and Olode means the owner of the sacred forest. And so we come full circle with the herbs and Babalu Aye being absolutely of the forest. And in fact, in Brazil, Babalu Aye and Osain are worshipped together, and their altars are absolutely together. So the vessel for Babalu Aye has a metal, what they call tool, ferramenta, that represents Osain. So they're deeply linked. And Babalu Aye's, in many ways, shares the dominion over the sacred forest with Osain. So what can you do with, how can you activate these insights from Oricha tradition? Well, first of all, you can explore your local landscape. Go out into the forest or onto the plain, or find the wildest park that you can near you and spend time in it, get to know it, learn about the animals and the plants that live there. You can also get to know local native communities if there are opportunities for that, and find ways to respectfully engage with them and learn about their histories. I should say that invocation that we usually do at the beginning of any ceremony honors the owners of the land, the Onile, as a particular category of ancestors. And in the New World, that is routinely understood to be the native populations who lived on the land and before we arrived. You can learn about your own ancestors and how they engaged with the natural world. So genealogy work fits here. Talking to the oldest person in your family about their experiences of nature is a very powerful strategy. I was very fortunate to grow up with grandparents who loved the natural world and took me on the water and in the woods and fishing, and that certainly had an enormous impact on me. Connecting to your elders and the ways in which they are connected to the earth is really powerful medicine. Think about your own social ecosystems and who you're connected to and who you need to be connected to. Think about, if you will, I mean, in some ways, the kind of local markets, farmers markets is an example of this. Who grows your food is a good question. But, you know, if any handmade product, who made that product? And where do the natural resources that go into it come from? And then finally, there are all kinds of ways that you can learn about your own relationship to this tradition as a religious practice by connecting with a diviner or a religious community. And that's how you can get a hold of me, michaelatwoodm@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at michaelatwoodm. I don't tweet a lot about these things. I tweet more about cultural heritage across the world, but I sometimes write about these things too. We have about 17 minutes for questions.
I want to just say thank you very much. That was incredible. I have never ever seen or read anything in the Oricha tradition that weaves together the knowledge in such a way. Your storytelling, taking us through the forest, connecting it to giving us examples of your own spirit and your, you know, eco-bio-psychosocial spiritual chart that you showed, right? Right. And, you know, and just your deep knowledge and wisdom. It was just incredibly rich. As a student of the Oricha and as a priest, it was very, very rich. I learned a lot. So thank you so much. I appreciate you so much, Michael. Questions, comments? There aren't dumb questions, people. Don't be afraid.
So, Mason has a question in the chat. Mason, my namesake. If there are ways that Babalua is seeing things that are in conflict with the Western medical approach to the pandemic. So if I understand your question, I don't think so. There's been a long conversation in Oricha communities over the last few years about what I guess I would call human excess, using too many resources and not paying enough attention to the natural world which sustains us. That's been a theme in the annual revelations for the last easily 5 years and probably a little longer. So there isn't anything specific that is in conflict with the Western medical approach at this point. That said, you know, Babalua is manifesting and giving advice to people all over, and I'm connected to a bunch of different folks. So I get about once a day, I get something from somebody who says, oh, Babalu was at a ceremony in our community and said he wants to be by the front door and you need to put out 7 gourds of dried beans and clean yourself every day. Well, that's, you know, having a practice of spiritual hygiene is not in contrast to Western medical advice. And those kinds of suggestions are coming out a lot. I think what I'm noticing is that Babalua has really stepped forward in everybody's community, not just because of the pandemic, but in other ways too. And so it will be interesting to see how long that lasts, or whether he dies back into oblivion and goes back into hiding. We'll know that probably in 5 or 7 years. And that's about his ritual number. That's not anything about how long I think it's going to take us to manage the pandemic more effectively. Paul has a question, tips on how we can engage ourselves with this practice on our own, on also seeking advice. So there are lots of great books about the tradition that can give you a good orientation. And then there's a really active community online where you can connect with people. You want to get to know people. It's like any other community. So you definitely want to spend time talking with folks before you get really engaged but it's a very open space. There's a LA.org, there's Oricha.net. There are lots of great chances, great opportunities to meet people and learn.
I just want to also say there's a group for women online. I think there may be a few elders that are here. It's a group called Women Oricha Group. I think that's what it's called. But we have very rich discussions, and there are very knowledgeable women leaders and priests in that group. I'm part of that group. Also, this is a very hierarchical religion. This is not something that you do on your own. I learned everything I learned from Michael and through elders. This is not, go renegade and you can tell yourself who your Oricha is. No, you need to find a respected elder. And just like if you would go to a doctor or you would go find an ecotherapist, you need to do your due diligence, ask for references, etc. Just like if you're seeking any other kind of, I would say, a health professional. So just know that Michael left his contact information. You can contact him. You can also contact me. I'm also a diviner and I work with students and I have godchildren as well, but just FYI. Any other questions? Let's see in the chat. So my Oricha, Michael is a Ochun priest with Elegwaz. He said, I got you priest with Ochun as my mother, as my second parent. So.
Hello?
Yeah, who's that?
Hello, it's Victoria.
Hey, Victoria from Australia.
Hello, good morning. That was extremely interesting. I've never heard of anything like that before, so thank you so much for sharing all that insight with us. I was wondering about the if there was any crossover between the Jungian psychology that you were sort of embedded in previously and your delving into this spiritual practice. Were there things that resonated and crossed over between those two ways of seeing that you could share with us?
Yes, certainly. So I think the first thing I would say is Dr. Jung said that he was actually not particularly interested in healing neurosis. He was really interested in the approach to the numinous, that powerful transformative experience of something that is greater than ourselves, and that lives often inside us and also outside of us. And so that, I think, is probably one of the key places where I see a really strong connection. And then there are certainly, in individual lives, you can make very clear connections often. You can see how a spirit is playing a particular kind of role within a person's psychology. What I think, as I said, the numinous is the most important piece for me. And I guess the other thing that Jung really stressed is that the objective psyche is real. That, if you have a psychic experience, if you have a dream, there is a reality to that experience which you have to take seriously, because it is an experience of the objective psyche. And that's another insight for me that really, that's just like what, it's the exact same notion that we have, we just use different language for it. That is to say, the spirits often come in dreams and share information. It's a really common form of revelation. And those experiences can be as transformative, as real as things that happen out here, in a three-dimensional world. So those are a couple of places where I see really strong crossover.
Okay, I see there's an Oricha priestess here raising her hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I think Bendición Alafia, I think it might be easier for me to just ask my question. I know that I know that it's wonderful. First of all, great what you talked about. I know that a lot of times we get Aleo asking about Oricha's connection with nature and sometimes going directly to nature and doing stuff. And that was one of the things that I was asking about, because your lecture talked a little bit about the Orishas being not only just being connected to nature, but they actually are there. How much can someone who's not initiated actually do there? And because that has just been kind of an timeless question, I guess, age-old question. And how does that actually work? I mean, can people, if they want to go talk to Ochun, go to the river regardless of age, status, etc., and can Ochun talk back to them there? That's the question.
That's a great question. May I ask who your Orisha is?
Yeah, I have Obatala made. I'm 26 now. Yeah, 1994.
Ashe. Congratulations.
Thank you. And my kids are Yawos.
Awesome. First of all, thank you for your kind words and your good question. I would say, in my experience, yes, people can go into the natural world and engage in a meaningful way with Orisha, Ochun at the river being a really good example. Is it the same? It's not the same. And I think those of us who are initiated have, qualitatively different experiences that we can talk about amongst ourselves. But there is something different about doing it with a ritual elder, because their ashe is coming through. But I don't want to ever try and suggest that people can't connect to the natural world themselves and find connection there. Is that revelation useful and valid? Yes. And is it infallible? Of course not. And so I would never say to somebody, if somebody came to me and said, and Alejo particularly came to me, and Aleo is somebody who's not initiated, for those of you who don't know, sorry. If an Aleo came to me and said, I went to the river and I prayed to Ochun and I got this very strong message that I needed to move, I would say, if they were in my community, well, that's great. That's a really rich opportunity for you to explore. Let's talk to Ochun, let's divine about this and verify that revelation, so that we can be a little more certain that it wasn't, a psychological wish or a spirit that was interceding, that, an evolved spirit that was interceding. And you might have actually heard something, but that doesn't mean that something was coming from Ochun. It could come from all kinds of other spiritual forces. So that's a short answer to your question, but I guess I do think that people connecting to the natural world themselves is powerful. And I wouldn't want to interrupt that. And I also understand that that has to be taken, that has to be processed carefully, thought about carefully, worked with carefully. So I hope that's a useful answer for you and the other folks who are listening. What do you think about it? That's an interesting, you obviously have lots of experience with 26 years of Ocha made.
No, that's what I think too. I mean, I think Orishas are accessible, and I really appreciate that. I think that's one of the questions that people ask often. So I wanted you to address it and was curious about your opinion, but I feel that very much. I think people of any stature should be able to find Orisha where they find them. But I do agree with you that it sometimes is that people may feel that they're hearing something back that does have to be verified. Divination is a very powerful tool, and training is key for us as Orishas too. So, so that's important. So thank you for your response. I think it was really clear.
Thanks. Jess has asked about, go ahead.
We're at 3:30, so I just want to honor the time. So if you have to leave, but people are still here, so I'm fine. The Zoom will still be going for a little while longer, as long as Michael has some time. So I just wanted to say that, but go ahead, Mike.
Thanks. I was just going to answer Jess's question, how I came to Oricha. I was, my father is was an Episcopal priest, and his brother was an Episcopal priest as well. And they both had very powerful visionary experiences, which I grew up hearing about. And so that's sort of how I understood how the relationship with the divine was supposed to work. And I read a book about the Orishas. I fell asleep and I dreamt that I was invoking Oya, the goddess of storms and transformation. And I called her name, but I said, Oya, Oya. And a voice, very clear woman's voice, said, no, it's Oya. And I woke up and I knew I was home, and I started doing, learning more and making connections. And it was incredibly important. It's been an incredibly interesting journey, and it's been incredibly important to me. So that happened when I was 20 or 21, and I was initiated when I was 26.
Michael, I have a question. If you could speak to how the traditions, specifically Lukumi, empowered and protected and assisted the Afro-Cuban, Black Cuban people in the midst of revolution, and just connected to social justice, and how it's helped, because that's how it's helped me. I'm not from Cuba. You know, my ancestors are via Mexico, and from what I know in genealogy, Africa and Europe. And, but it's been very empowering for me as my identity as a Black person. So could you speak a little bit to that, please?
Sure. I mean, I guess the first thing I would say about that is our tradition is very much about transforming individuals into the rulers of their own lives, the rulers of their own destiny. And so that shift from being not having a lot of agency, whether, you know, being exploited, having internalized racism, you know, incredibly pervasive and really diabolical kinds of institutions of oppression in plantation slavery in Cuba, for sure. The shift from that to saying, I have been crowned by a deity, and I walk, you know, I have firmeza, I have my own solidity, my own resolve, my own autonomy. And that is a huge, huge shift, and a brilliant shift for people who've experienced oppression, I think. So there is a valuing of the individual and an empowering of the individual, a recognition of the individual's innate, empowering is not the right word, a recognition of the individual's innate divinity that transforms them. And, you know, just to be clear, there are other traditions that use the same kind of imagery, right? In Rastafari, you know, locks are sometimes called the crown. And in the Sikh tradition, men wear turbans in part because it is supposed to remind them of a crown, and that they are the kings of their own lives. So the idea of being the king or queen of your own world is really, really powerful. So that's the first thing I would say. The other thing I would say is, you know, this idea that I stumbled across when we were talking in preparation for today. I think it's important to understand that the tradition was used for years and years, decades, and maybe even centuries for individuals to solve local problems as they were trying to make it through the world, a world that was very hostile to them as people of color. And So they were worried about things like losing their jobs and, their houses being broken into or burned or getting evicted, or somebody making a move on their partner, or their children getting beaten up in the street. So the religion was very focused on very local human to human problems, because that's where people were. That was the reality that they had to wrestle with. And one of the things that's happened as the religion has evolved is in the New World, certainly in the Americas, is that it's become a source of pride for people of color. It's become a place where people can come together in interesting ways to find community. It's become a way for people to connect to the landscape wherever they are. So if you start in Cuba and you're a refugee and you end up in Minnesota, there's still a river and Ochun is still there and you can still connect. So I think that we're seeing this move away from, not that it's no longer useful for people dealing with everyday life, but many communities are able to engage in a bigger conversation about what it teaches us about other stuff as well. What it teaches us about how to heal our connection with the natural world, for example.
Thank you. And all those things that you mentioned, daily life, many of us worry about that now. We have lots of homelessness. We're afraid of eviction. We're afraid of losing our jobs. That's how I've been able to be successful in my life, is through my daily tending, getting initiated, and through my relationships with the Oricha and the ancestors and the elders and communities. Without that, I would not be here. The level of post-traumatic stress slave syndrome in my family was so great and so intense, it prevented me from being able to grow into and get my crown. I needed the interceding, I needed the intervention of Lukumi, the Oricha, the elders, Osain, Aganyu, Ochun, the river, the forest. I needed all those forces to come together to heal me, and they continue to heal me, to build me up so that I could function at this level, with my own inner solidity, with mental health, right? Mental clarity, with all of these things, because when I was born, I started behind. There is a proverb in the Odu, Ejiogbe, you were born in the trash, but you will die in the palace. And that is what I have been experiencing in my life. So I just wanted to say that. You had something else to say. I'm sorry, Michael.
No, I was just going to echo what you said. It's not, I didn't mean to suggest that institutionalized racism had gone away and that everybody's lives were perfect. That was not what I was trying to say. I was trying to say things have gotten better incrementally for a lot of people, and that's provided some slack for people to think beyond their immediate needs, allowed some people to think beyond their immediate needs some of the time, which is great. I wasn't trying to suggest that structural racism had disappeared.
Yeah. Are there any books you want to shout out and type into the chat, or I can type into the chat?
It's hard for me to recommend books. Sorry, it's just not.
Right, I agree.
There are none that I really, really love. So The Way of the Oricha is a pretty good book, although it's got a sort of a very particular cast to it, particularly when it comes to Yemaya and Olokun. But it's a good introduction to the deities. John Mason, no relation, although it is my father's name. He is not my father. John Mason, Black Gods and Kings, I think is the name of that book. And that's also a great introduction to the deities in a kind of plain vanilla wrapper, but it gives you a lot of information in a very short text. Those are both available on Amazon. If you want to go into the history of the religion, I would recommend Santeria Enthroned by David Brown. It won a research prize, and it's widely regarded as a terrific history of the religion in Cuba. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, it's hard to find that book. That book is very popular, but if you can find Santeria Enthroned, that's good, but it sells out a lot. Someone asked, is Ocha connected to Tarot, Michael?
Oh yeah, sorry. So there are at least 2 Oricha tarot decks, and is it connected to tarot? So people have connected it. It was not historically connected, although in Cuba people did use tarot and regular playing cards to divine and explore the same way people use tarot here. So these new card decks are actually, I have one that I like, that I use periodically. So it can easily be interspersed with tarot, and the decks that I've seen, the 2 decks that I've seen, use Orishas as major arcana cards. Replacing some of the cards and then adding additional major arcana as the deities.
But Mike, I want to ask for some clarity, because I've seen people online get very confused about this. Tarot is not Orisha religion. It doesn't mean you can do Orisha divination. You're not doing Orisha divination with tarot. You have to be initiated. So just to clarify that.
Yes. You can do good spiritual divination with your ancestors. If you're clear and you have ancestors that you can connect with, you can get really good information that way. But it is not going to definitively say who your Orisha is, or define your kind of path through the world. It can still be very useful.
Right. Again, I recommend contact Michael, contact me, find elders that you can work with. So we are going to wrap it up here. We've gone a few minutes over time. I want to give thanks again to Michael for this very rich and deep offering. It's an offering to us all. And thank you to elders that were here. Thank you to Craig Chalquist and Linda, who are my Ecotherapy colleagues and mentors and support as well. Thank you all. Go ahead.
I just want to shout out Ma Ferefuni Yami.
Ache.
I
And
was just saying thanks to my mom who's with us today.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. We really appreciate you. Thank you, Michael.
And thank you for making this opportunity for all of us to come together, Phoenix.